And so what we have in his book is a back and forth. Another example would be how on page 150 he says that the eye can evolve. So he's attacking one of the most glaring examples of how ridiculous evolution is. The eye cannot evolve. But then just a few pages later, on page 153, he's talking about consciousness, how human beings are conscious, that we can experience and understand and know the world around us in a unique way. And he talks about human rationality and morality. And he argues that the existence of consciousness is counterproductive to evolution. And so this is extremely evil because even though what he's saying here is true, he's making it seem as if he doesn't believe in evolution, when he's already told us that he believes that evolution is basically a proven fact and the best explanation. Now he's switching sides and saying that, well, the existence of consciousness actually weighs heavily against evolution. No, you can't have it both ways. And he tries to have it both ways, not only in terms of claiming to believe in the Bible and in evolution, but also claiming to believe in evolution and yet arguing against evolution frequently. Now, I want to quickly cover how Dinesh D'Souza claims to be a Catholic, but in fact is an outrageous heretic. He's obviously extremely liberal and ecumenical. For example, on page 11, he analyzes the movement, how so many former Catholics are converting to evangelical Protestantism. And he says that this conversion from being a lackadaisical or nominal Catholic to an active, energized evangelical Protestant can be considered a, quote, net gain for Christianity. So he's saying that it's good to convert to Protestantism, at least if you are only a lackadaisical Catholic. He is also saying that Protestantism is Christianity. So obviously he does not believe that Protestantism is heresy. On page 70, he even quotes Martin Luther. He says, quote, during the Reformation, Martin Luther stressed the individualism of the Christian journey, end quote. I'm sorry, a Catholic cannot quote Luther unless it's to historically analyze his apostasy or condemn him or refute him, etc. To quote him on the Christian journey is to imply that he was a Christian in some way, a man who rejected a multitude of Catholic dogmas, said the Pope and Cardinal should be killed, and called the Catholic teachings basically a set of diabolical lies. I want to now talk about one of the most interesting understatements I've read in a long time. It's found in his book on page 60, and I think that this serves to illustrate his profound liberalism and wicked desire to appeal to the, quote, intellectual community. In this area of his book, he's analyzing how some of the ancient cultures, such as ancient Greece, were not quite as good as some people would like to think. And he's making some interesting points in this regard. He's pointing out how most marriages were arranged, and how the husband and wife were not even expected to be friends. And he's trying to point out how Christianity was beneficial to the world. And he's making some very interesting and good points on this subject. And he goes on to discuss how Eros was a powerful force in ancient Greece, and how it expressed itself in homosexuality. He explains how it was common in Athens, homosexuality. And on page 60, he's explaining how they constructed an educational philosophy based on pederasty or pedophilia. And he explains how these sick individuals conceived pedophilia or pederasty in terms of an exchange, while the young boy agreed to sexual relations with an older man, and in return he received knowledge and tutoring. And about this abomination, Dinesh D'Souza comments, quote, we may worry that the younger boy might be exploited in such a relationship, but the ancients did not, end quote. That's what he says after bringing out this sick abomination that was practiced in ancient Greece. He says that we may worry that the younger boy might be exploited in such a relationship, but the ancients did not. That's what I call the understatement of the year. Exploited. He's barely even criticizing it. If that. Obviously he doesn't agree with it. I'm not saying that. But my point is that his language is so incredibly weak. He doesn't even muster up the courage to denounce it in no uncertain terms. But he says that we may worry that the young boy might be exploited, rather than pointing out this is evil, this is an abomination. And I believe the reason he is so weak in commenting on this is because he wants to appeal to the largest number of people possible and not ostracize those in the homosexual community possibly, or be considered radical or condemnatory. And this is evil. On page 50, Dinesh D'Souza refers to Muhammad as, quote, the prophet. He says, the prophet Muhammad was in his own day both a prophet and a Caesar who integrated the domains of church and state, end quote. Now, he might claim that that's just what he's known as. No, a Catholic, in other words, a Christian, cannot refer to a false prophet who began a false religion as the prophet. On page 21, he makes some comments which I think show how empty his heretical outlook is. As we've discussed, he believes in evolution, and so he's arguing for the positives of religion. And he says, quote, religious people develop a zest for life that is, in a sense, unnatural. They exhibit a hopefulness about the future that may exceed what is warranted by how the world is going, end quote. And so it's just quite empty that that's basically what religion does for you. It just gives you a zest for life. But as it's mixed in with his contradictory evolutionary arguments, his heretical religious indifferentism, etc., it leaves you with a void and a powerlessness to the message he's promoting. And there are other things I could mention, but I'll just end by quickly pointing out that perhaps the biggest lie in his book, What's So Great About Christianity, is that evolution is compatible with the Bible. It is most assuredly not. And I'll just give a few quick examples. Evolution, even theistic evolution, believes that man evolved from a lower animal, whereas the Bible clearly says that Adam was formed from the dust, not from a lower animal. So that's a clear error if you believe in evolution as Dinesh D'Souza does. We also read in Mark 6 verse 10, where Jesus says that, quote, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, end quote. Well, that is clearly incompatible with the belief that the earth was formed and creatures existed for millions of years, and then came man and woman. Jesus is saying that from the very beginning of creation, God made them male and female. There are many other points we could cover, such as how theistic evolution believes that the first creatures were simple sea creatures, whereas the Bible says that the first animals created were very developed whales, mammals. Theistic evolution teaches that all forms of life have a common ancestor, and that there are transitions between all different forms of life, whereas the Bible teaches that there are different kinds of creatures, and each kind reproduces after itself. There are many other points that could be covered, but I'll just quote Dinesh D'Souza on page 147 of What's So Great About Christianity. Speaking of Darwin's theory, he says, quote, there is no reason to reject it purely on biblical grounds, end quote. And that is probably the biggest and most deceptive falsehood in his book which is becoming somewhat popular and has been declared a, quote, New York Times bestseller. The liberal media has no problem promoting it, probably because it can serve to amalgamate the creationist movement with the evolution hoax, and thereby attempt to destroy the movement for truth in that area.